Hello and welcome. I'm Susan Nielsen with the Portland Workforce Alliance. Today we're going to hear from two amazing people who have started their own businesses to help fight climate change. Marcelino Alvarez is using his years of experience in business and product design to tackle a big global problem, which is pollution from fuel. Amelia is a 2020 graduate of Lewis and Clark College, who's tackling another big problem, which is the plastic waste that's in our current supply chains. Both are entrepreneurs, and both will speak to their experience and their passion, and will give advice to students here who want to fight climate change, start their own business, or both. And so with that, I will turn it over to our esteemed panelists. And I'm hoping you both can introduce yourselves and share your connection with Oregon, and maybe just give a quick description of your role.
Sure.
Marcelino, do you want? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Hi, everyone. I'm Amelia. I graduated from Lewis and Clark College, as Susan said, in May 2020. I studied religious studies and Middle East and North African studies, and I've been passionate about climate change my whole life. I was involved in Lewis and Clark's Center for Entrepreneurship and Leadership, which is how I became connected with the startup world in Portland, joined the Portland Incubator Experiment with my idea for smart refill stations for liquid and cream products to phase out single-use plastics in the supply chains. Really excited to talk to you all about our entrepreneurship journey. I also am involved in the Portland Global Shapers, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So I'm still very connected to Portland, even though I'm living currently in Santa Cruz working on Wonderfill.
Thank you, Amelia. How about you, Marcelino?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Marcelino Alvarez. I'm CEO of Photon Marine. We are developing electric outboard motors targeting the tourism and transportation marine fleet industry. I've been in Portland since 2006. I actually used to work in advertising and came out to Portland right before the rainy season in 06 to work at an ad agency called White & Kennedy. And there I led interactive advertising campaigns for a number of clients. And after a few years, I thought I wanted to start my own agency and consultancy in the product design space, which coincidentally was part of PI, the Portland Incubator Experiment, back in 2010 when it was just a desk share operation, and learned a ton around operating a business from that experience and became a mentor to PI. And so Amelia and my journey kind of intersect a little bit through the common elements of the Portland Incubator Experiment. I don't think either of us would be where we are if it weren't for the tenacious efforts of Rick Tarosi and the Portland startup scene.
Oh, thank you so much for that context to both of you. And maybe we can just dive right in and hear just a little bit more about your business. I'm wondering what the emotion or realization is that sparked your business, and just tell us more about the problem that you're trying to solve.
Sure. So while I was studying at the Center for Entrepreneurship and Leadership at Lewis and Clark, was introduced to a method called Map the System, which I was really hungry for solutions after learning about so many systemic problems in college. I was really looking for a tool to use to try to find systemic solutions to systemic problems, and was introduced to this Map the System method, which my mentor at the Bates Center encouraged me to apply to a problem that I was very passionate about, which was climate change. And during that research, right, you're trying to identify all of the stakeholders who are involved in a particular problem and dive really deeply into a problem and kind of map it out and see what the roots of those problems are. So I decided to go a little bit more specific and look at the fossil fuel industry, and there discovered that there's a lot of infrastructure and investment being put into place to transition the dirty energy grid, right, to renewable energy, clean energy. But due to that realization that energy generation and transportation is going to move away from fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry is investing heavily into plastic production. It's kind of their plan B, right? They have to continue to generate value and profit for their shareholders. So they've invested billions of dollars into creating plastic production facilities in the US and abroad. And that's going to result in plastic accounting for at least 40% of fossil fuel demand by 2050 is kind of the projections. So there's a huge need now to kind of develop alternatives to plastic in order to prevent fossil fuels from continuing to be such a large chunk of our resource consumption, because plastic production is really polluting, and it affects frontline communities the most, right? People who contribute least to the problem are the most affected. So that was kind of the central realization during that project of like realizing when you look all around it, plastic is everywhere, and that's just going to grow and grow and grow, right? So it's a huge problem. And when I was doing that research, discovered a whole community of people who were working on that same problem, and a huge demand for bulk distribution infrastructure. So, transportation and logistics for distributing products in bulk rather than in single-use plastic containers. And that's how I came up with the idea for these smart refill stations and an inventory management platform running throughout it, and kind of came to Pi with that idea and have been developing that into a business plan ever since.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amelia, for that context. And you, Marcelino, what you?
Sure. So I was catching up with a friend of mine who's now actually one of my co-founders, Charles Steinbeck, and was asking him sort of around the need for technology in kind of the maritime space. I've been a lifelong boater, grew up in Florida, appreciated sort of the fragility of our ocean ecosystems, and it was one of those things that was taught to me from an early age to preserve our oceans so that they can last for future generations. And that used to be a pretty bipartisan sort of sentiment, and it's kind of sad that I think that slipped in the subsequent years. But that was just sort of a view that was kind of instilled from a very early age, and was catching up with Charles and just saying, hey, what use do you have for technology in this space? Like I was kind of, I think, similar to Amelia, kind of craving something that had impact. And he was saying, that look, a lot of the emerging markets, a lot of the areas that he had been doing work in the Caribbean and Central America and South America are relying on old two-stroke outboard motors, which release, I think, up to 25% of their fuel unburnt into the water. And it's like, if we don't find a pathway to electrifying these boats, just all the other conservation efforts around preserving these fragile ecosystems are going to be for naught, because we can't catch up. And so originally I was like, well, I'm sure there's something that exists that we could just buy and then go put on some boats. And I think as we did more research into that, into the use cases in those areas, realized that wasn't the case, and that there really wasn't anything that was viable for sort of the use cases around some of the fisher communities that he was working with. So we kind of looked adjacent to those communities, realizing, I think, very quickly that a fisher in these communities was not going to be able to afford a really expensive kind of system, but that adjacent to it, there is the tourism industry that uses some of the same resources to actually carry out tourism expeditions and whatnot, and reached out to a former client of mine who had since left the cruise industry. And I was like, hey, this is something I'm thinking about, curious what your take on it. And she's like, oh, this is really interesting. I'd love to join you if you have space for someone like me. And so Tara came on board with that. And so really just kind of became sort of a confluence of a few of us kind of, inspired by different sort of histories, looking at sort of a common sort of problem set, and really kind of applying our expertise to bear to solve something that has impact. And I think coming out of the pandemic, I think many of us are looking for that opportunity to shape the world in ways that perhaps we haven't been able to over the last 2 years, just because everything has sort of kind of taken away sort of our sort of agency in terms of being able to effectuate change. And so this felt like a funneling of energy into something that could have tremendous impact, not just for the tourism industry, but beyond into the fishers and municipal kind of areas that depend on our waterways, those waterways to really move commerce, people, whether they be citizens or visitors, up and down the rivers, lakes, and near coastal areas.
It's interesting how you both are tackling. I mean, your businesses are very different, but you're tackling really big problems on a very small scale, and you have to start somewhere. I mean, everything has to start with one person, two people. As you get started and try to build momentum, can you talk about some of your experience that you've had of some of the benefits of working for yourself and what some of the challenges are? Because being an entrepreneur, I mean, there are a lot of rewards, there are a lot of risks. So can you talk about that with your organizations?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'll start with the challenges, because there's just a few, and they're pretty clear. So when you start something, new with a very small team, just my co-founder and I, and then we brought more people on. As we grow, there's so much to be done, right? And you're constantly, you set out a plan for what needs to be done. And then as you start getting to work, more and more things start getting added to your plate that need to happen in order for you to accomplish the goals that you've set out to accomplish. So very quickly, you're prioritizing, right? And making decisions about, okay, what can get done in the short amount of time. And there's risk associated with that, because when it comes to prioritization, like, you're going to have to prioritize sort of the legal and financial things that aren't necessarily what you got into this project for, right? And aren't necessarily your strong suits. So it's really a matter of having advisors who can advise you, okay, you know, my co-founder and I don't have experience starting a business. So people who have started it before, what are the things that you necessarily have to have right now in order to take that next step, and what can be put off until a little bit later? So that's a big challenge, is prioritization and making sure that you're managing your time properly, and making sure that you're keeping your sights set on the reasons why you got into this project in the first place, which is to have the impact that you set out to have and work with the people who you want to work with, and you know, really spread your idea. And that's what you have to keep in mind all the time when you're getting bogged down in all of the bureaucratic and kind of logistical minutia. The benefits of working for yourself are that I have always loved project management, and it's such a creative process, right? Like, you are starting from scratch and you are deciding what tools and what assets and resources you want to implement in order to build this into the organization that you want it to be, right? So it's really a creative and a collaborative process, and it's only going to succeed if you're able to communicate to people your vision, and really get people to kind of imagine what you're imagining and then bring their experience to the table. And that project of just imagining together and then building something and seeing if you're able to execute on it is extremely satisfying. And if you're the kind of person who likes to you know, create things from scratch, and it's a really, really fun project. That's probably been my most favorite thing, is the collaborative and creative aspect.
That does sound really fun, and a lot of juggling.
Yeah.
Marcelino, does any of that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would plus one everything that Amelia just said, both on the risks and sort of the upside as well. You know, I think the entrepreneur's journey is one where you are accepting sort of that level of risk of not just, you know, providing for yourself, right? Like, it's like being a freelancer times, you know, however many employees you have. There are people that you've brought on board for whom, you know, their livelihood depends on decisions that you make, and that is a weighty decision, both from, you know, from the recruitment side all the way to having to let someone go. That those are decisions that impact people's lives, and at the same time, it can be, you know, incredibly fulfilling to kind of, you know, be part of that recruitment and team building process, and it's something that I really enjoy. You know, I mentioned Tara and Charles, so neither of them nor me are engineers, and so the idea of building electric outboard motors needed the kind of route through an engineer who could, and through our network was able to get connected to our CTO Nick, and, you know, we kind of hit it off. And so that energy of just meeting someone who shares similar views, and that you're, you know, sort of in sort of the you know, sort of you know, kind of control of being able to kind of build out a team and understand how, you know, each new hire will impact the culture of an organization, and how the decisions that you make today will have precedent, you know, 2, 3, 5 years from now, when someone's going to ask you, well, what was it like back then? And, you know, when you're in the sort of the throes of that moment, you're not thinking about that, because, you know, you're prioritizing and then trying to, you know, focus on what you're working on. But every decision that you make at these early stages has, you know, an impact down the line, and obviously you don't know what those are going to be, and it's always really interesting to see, like, kind of when it comes back. And so you're constantly creating, you're creating, you know, connections, you're creating products, you're creating customers, and you're creating sort of precedent for future conversations, some good and some bad, that will come back to you. And that idea of constantly being a creator, I think, is sort of, you know, at the root of what it means to be an entrepreneur.
Right. That's really helpful. And And with that in mind, maybe we focus back again on just on the environmental and climate aspect of both of your work. Many students who are here with us today and watching today are really concerned about climate change. Many of them may be heading for careers that don't have a clear connection to the environment. What advice do you have for them if they would like to feel like they were part of the solution, or like they like to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem?
You want to go ahead, Marcelino?
Sure. I think that every career moving forward will be a climate career. It might not be labeled as such, but every business decision that an organization will make in the next 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years will have a climate impact. I think that this is true if you're a financial services company, like a bank, or a fintech company, like something that relies on blockchain and crypto. The idea of energy consumption and servers required to process things will become part of the calculus. If you're, a retail or a consumer, CPG type company, the material decisions that you make for your packaging is obviously part of it. It's a set of climate decisions. If you're in the tourism industry, every voyage, every trip that someone takes on an airplane or boat to get to a destination is a climate business. If you're making shoes or you're making software, every decision within an organization is going to have a climate impact. I think what has changed is that historically those decisions were sort of part of sustainability type goals, and there was kind of departments that kind of focused on that, and I think the critique, rightfully so, from the more progressive mind is that in many cases organizations just kind of greenwashed the climate decisions to be like, we're just going to check some boxes to make it look like we care. We're going to buy some carbon offset credits and we're going to move on, and then we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. But I think that one of the opportunities for this upcoming generation is to place the idea of governance as part of the decisions that organizations make, and that will matter. It's sort of the voting box for shareholders, people that own stocks, to what products you choose to buy, to just the fact that the effects of climate change are visible at a scale that they've never been visible before. And here in the Pac Northwest, we now have a fire season, and we had a fire season in the middle of a pandemic where you couldn't go outside while everything was burning outside, and you couldn't be indoors because there was a pandemic, right? All these things have their roots in climate. And so the idea that climate is a label that sort of sits at the fringe of sort of this thing is like saying we're going to use computers, we're going to use a mobile device. They are foundational to the existence of corporations and, more importantly, humanity. So I would say that every business will be a climate focused business by the time that these students are hitting the workforce. And if for whatever reason they're not, then perhaps they should look to organizations that have made that recognition and are taking steps to mitigate their impacts.
Yeah. Something that I've learned a lot, I had no experience in the corporate world before starting on this journey, and I've learned about the desire among large companies and small companies for innovation. And I think as a young person going into the workforce, you will be an even more attractive candidate if you come into that interview with ideas about how that organization can be not only more sustainable, but be improved by being more sustainable, right? So my advice would be, look for companies who really inspire you and who are doing things that are not greenwashing and that are having a tangible impact for climate, and point to those organizations and say, this is what this organization is doing. This is what I would like to see implemented here. And that can happen, for all across the board, right? There are numerous examples of companies who are implementing, whether that be, a social benefit with a salary cap, and then a portion of their profits donated to the environment. You can make the argument, right, for any social or environmental impact ultimately benefiting the planet, right? And as long as you are kind of keeping up to date and aware of organizations who are trying and implementing new things and what is successful and what isn't successful, you're going to have a whole, repertoire of solutions that can be implemented. I really think if we're going to make progress towards eliminating carbon emissions, it has to come from people looking at their organization and saying, okay, what has worked elsewhere that we can try here and see if it can work here. It's going to be a bunch of people trying to implement those small changes, and then that leaves it up to the larger organizations, rather than trying to coordinate from the top down, to just be in charge of collecting reports and data about what has and hasn't worked, and trying to make best practices recommendations, right? The work that people can really do on the ground when they're joining new organizations is to make suggestions for the changes that can happen, and then just getting them factored into that organizational structure and seeing if it works. That's if you're trying to join an existing company. If you're trying to start your own company, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you need to do. But the good news is that there are plenty of amazing examples and models out there. And my ultimate suggestion would be just to find other organizations and startups that are doing it really well, and then try to replicate or model what you're building off of what they're doing.
This is great advice. Thank you. I don't know if both of you thought about being entrepreneurs when you were in high school yourself, but when you do think about your high school self, is there one thing that you wish you had known then in terms of figuring out your career path and what it means to be happy at work?
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
It's funny. I rejected the label of entrepreneurship in high school. I think I got nominated for something to be an entrepreneur. I was like, I don't even know what that is. No, and I turned it down. So I don't think I was aware then of stuff, but I always had ideas. I guess I always had ideas for random things, and I think that carried into college. And I think it felt like there was such an inertia gap in going from the idea I had in my head to actually doing a thing. And it wasn't until much later where the idea of prototyping or rapid prototyping, or just things like startup weekends, right, where you participate in sort of a weekend of generating business ideas and kind of validating those. I wish, if I could tell myself anything, it's it's actually not that hard to get started. It's actually hard to keep going once you do get started. In those early ones, when you encounter sort of your first obstacle of oh, this has been done before, or someone's doing this better, or but I think for so much of my early life, I would have the idea, and it would just kind of sit there and just kind of fester, and then someone would go on to do the thing, and I'd be oh, yeah, I thought about that. So I would say don't resist that sort of inertia gap, and just try it out. Go participate in an event like a startup weekend, or join a startup club, or if there aren't those resources around you, talk to people who are in the community. I would say Portland writ large is such an accessible city, and so you can pretty much email any founder, any person, and just say, hey, you're doing something that's really interesting. I saw you give this talk. Could I buy you a coffee and get some perspectives? And go do that. If you're thinking about something, buying a coffee is a really easy thing that you can do, even if you don't drink coffee. Drink water or tea or something. But taking someone out, and that small little step then kind of unlocks your curiosity. So I would say, don't be afraid to pursue your curiosity and take some of those first steps. The resources are there, and it's so much easier now than it was back then to start a business. To meet people who are also interested. They're out there. There are communities, if not locally, certainly on the internet, to find people that can be mentors and resources. And there are people that will give that advice and information for free because they want to see the next generation succeed. So find those people first. Don't go work with people that are charging you with stuff out of the gates. Those are the wrong kinds of people to talk to. But get over that inertial gap and just get going. Because the idea that you have in your head that you think no one is going to think is cool might actually be the next big thing, and you just need to go ask enough people about it before you really figure out if it is or isn't.
Yeah, I emphasize everything that Marcelino said. It really just comes down to talking to people about the ideas that you have and seeing what sticks and what they lead you to. Being a student or being someone who's on a job search is the greatest gift that you can have, because you can reach out to people and basically say, hey, I'm doing research. I really like what you do. Tell me more about what you do, right? There's this, in the startup world, there's the NSF I-Corps, and there's a 7-day long program called Customer Discovery. And the whole point of that program is to get people who just have an idea. They say, I'm part of the I-Corps program, right? They get this like distinguished context basically for just reaching out, sending cold emails to people on LinkedIn or just anyone and saying, hey, I'm doing research about this problem. It directly relates to the work you do. Would you be willing to have a 30-minute, an hour-long conversation with me about this? And then they just ask them questions, and you're doing like 100 interviews in a week. And that's just anything that you're curious about, right? If you send someone a message and say, hey, you know, I'm doing research about this problem. I'm looking for a job in this area. I noticed that you do this, this, and this. More than likely, people will want to sit down with you and tell you more about it. And that's really how you learn. You know, you won't find the same information online as you will having a conversation with someone who's really in the industry. And that's what I did for Wonderfil. You know, before I had any kind of prototype, before I even had the idea for refill stations, I was really just reaching out to people and asking them, why are you reliant on plastic, right? What is the challenge trying to phase out plastic in your supply chain? And that's what led me ultimately to the idea of refill stations. So if you focus more on like the problem that you're passionate about, and that's how you frame those conversations, rather than saying, hey, I have this idea for something specific, say, hey, I'm really concerned about this problem, and I noticed that you're in this industry. Can I ask you some questions? Oftentimes those conversations will lead you towards a solution. And yeah, that would be my suggestion for just really take advantage, right, of being a student, being someone who's curious about the world, and go out and have conversations, because you'll meet people, you'll meet the most interesting people, and they'll know that you share a similar passion, and they might invite you to come work on a project they're working on, or eventually you'll be able to follow up with them and have them be an advisor or maybe a future employee on whatever you decide to work on.
That's such good advice. And it's so true. People do say yes more often than not. I mean, there are no's, but there are a lot of yeses, a lot of doors that open.
And I would say, even just to add, if you're too shy to reach out to someone to meet with them in person, we have social media. This is maybe the best thing that you could use social media for, right? Is to find a Reddit group or, you know, someone on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter to talk to. So even if you're shy and don't want to talk to someone in person, there are definitely communities and tools that you can use online.
Absolutely. Well, last question, the last few minutes we have together. What is your favorite thing about your current job, and what's bringing you joy with the work that you're doing right now?
Do you want to go, Marcelino?
You go first. This is yours.
I think truly finally understanding the meaning of work-life balance. I, you know, have this small team, and when you are a startup founder, you are setting the expectations and setting the pace. No one else is going to set it for you, right? So you are very acutely aware that if you are taking time off, it's directly impacting the momentum of your company, right? Mm-hmm. And it's coming to terms with that, and it's saying, that's okay, right? Good things take time, and we are not going to achieve anything worthwhile if we're just exhausting ourselves and burning ourselves out, right? And the understanding that everything in this world is made by human beings. I mean, now with machine learning, there's like a little nuance there, but in everything you do, right, there's a human behind it. And so to get a very intimate look at what goes into creating a company, and realizing, oh, this is why we have vacation days, and this is why organizations have HR, and you know, it's internal to Wonderfil. It's been a really wonderful project to communicate with my team about what our needs are and what we need to take care of ourselves. And that factors into our project management style, like when we're setting up meetings, how we're scheduling, how we're setting up, you know, vacation time and expectations for deadlines. And it's affecting the way that I'm just seeing the world around me, right? And interacting with people, because it's just really, really important to always keep in mind that people, you know, are really tired. This is a really hard time. And I think if you're doing something related to climate change, that's a conversation that a lot of people need to have. I find that that's a conversation people don't get tired of having, right? We all have these ideas. We're all really concerned, and it feels good to kind of connect with someone about the shared concern over climate change. So if you are tying your work into that passion and you're able to find common ground with someone, that can help kind of remediate the monotony of like day-to-day work and incorporate some joy and some creativity and passion into work. So that's been the most fun thing.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean, I would plus one that sentiment of just taking time for yourself. Mental health, physical health are so important because the organization is tied to your ability to continue moving forward. And if you're burning the midnight oil for way too much time, you're not going to be effective as a leader. And I think the same is true of your colleagues and employees. Like the tone of the CEO sort of sets the pace here. And if people see that you're not taking care of yourself in that way, or you're sending emails from vacation, like then it just creates a sort of like this unfair pressure on them to do the same as well. So I think making space, I think it's an excellent area to lead by example. Lead by example. Go take a vacation. Go take a weekend. Enjoy that time. Don't, there are times certainly to push, but that's not 100% of the time. You have to balance that out. I think for me, like and maybe this is partially the pandemic sort of speaking, but sort of the lens of sort of like legacy and sort of impact, I think have become really intertwined for me. I've got 2 small children and a third on the way, and then just the idea of like the relationship that I have between myself, the screen, the light that's shining on me, the AirPods in my ears, and sort of like the real world that's out there, and the impact that we can create. And I think for me, part of what I'm really excited to get into is to make sort of a connection between like the work that I'm doing today and the environments that we can go enjoy on a vacation or on a trip, or that we can explain the context of the work that we're doing to not just our peers, not just others in the climate space, not just others in sort of the industries that we hope to serve, but to like our children, to see the impact of the work that we do day to day is in service of legacy and of preserving a particular way of life, or multiple ways of life for future generations to enjoy. I just got back from a vacation, and my 5-year-old son took up snorkeling for the first time, and my daughter, who's 4, they went on a little raft with like a window, and we were able to like see reef fish in the natural setting, not the tiny little aquarium we have in our house. And for them to be able to see that firsthand and to like identify fish and see things like that is something that I want to build upon with them, but it's something that I want them to be able to build upon with their children one day. And the ability to kind of connect that what I'm doing today is in service of that tomorrow or in the generation after, I think is something that has been lacking in my career up until now. And for me, that's the thing that I'm most excited about it. And that ties into like the work-life balance, and that like it is balancing the work that I do with the life that I want to lead and that I want to see my children and grandchildren enjoy one day.
Right. Well, that is a great note to end on. Just want to say thank you so much, Marcelino and Amelia, for your time today. We wish you both the best in your business development and just your work ahead. I hope to see electric motors all over Oregon really soon. I hope to see those wonderful refill stations all across Oregon and have that model really take off. And to the students who are joining us, we wish you the best in your career journey as well. Really glad you're here. Thanks again. And that's a wrap for today.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Yeah.